So ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are with us on the Zoom and all of you that are slowly joining to our Facebook transmission, my name is Jakub Nowakowski and I'm the director of the Galicia Jewish Museum in Kraków, Poland. And it is my pleasure to welcome you at this panel discussion that is happening as a part of the program accompanying Jewish Culture Festival that is happening right now in Kraków. This is yet another discussion that we bring to you this week. Earlier this week we've been discussing identity and complicated relations of the second and third generation to Poland or with Poland. We have been talking with Israeli guides that are bringing groups to Poland and trying to see what it is that is bringing people to Poland. We will also tomorrow speak with chief curator of the new ANU Museum that has just been opened in Tel Aviv, as well as the director of the Lost Shtetl Museum that is being built in Lithuania these days. So this is all coming. But now we are honored and privileged to have Hannah Rosenbaum from the Claims Conference with us for the program that will be devoted to the question of Holocaust education. We want to understand where we are in terms of the Holocaust education and what are the challenges and goals that we are facing collectively as institutions that are dealing with the education about the Holocaust in different places. And I think that there's no better organization than Claims Conference that would have such an overlook and such an experience in programs that are happening in many places around the world. And Hannah Rosenbaum is perhaps the person that we should speak about this with, as Hannah Rosenbaum has been working in Claims Conference for 20 years. She is the program manager for the organization's research, education, and documentation department, and it is her role to oversee all programs that are happening outside of Israel, including the Claims Conference film programs, research and documentation, as well as education outreach, as well as the Kagan Fellowship and the University Partnership Program. And so to kind of put this into numbers, Hannah oversees grants and distribution that are distributed to over 130 organizations in 28 different countries of the world, including Poland, where we as the Galicia Jewish Museum are also collaborating and benefiting from the Claims Conference support for the programs for teachers that we've been doing for over 10 years now. So Hannah, first of all, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or evening or morning, depending where you are. Could we start from very beginning? I mean, where the story of the Claims Conference starts.
Thank you for having me. And yes, I'm thrilled to be here to speak with you. And I'm happy to give you a little bit of background about the organization, the Claims Conference. So the Claims Conference was founded in 1951 by Nachum Goldman. He was the co-chair of the Jewish Agency and president of the World Jewish Congress, and he convened 23 major Jewish organizations from around the world, and they formed what was called the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. And the mandate of this organization was to negotiate for material compensation for Jewish victims of the Holocaust. So in 1952, the Luxembourg agreements were signed, and these were really groundbreaking because it was the first time that any such restitution agreement had ever been signed. And the parties to this agreement were the State of Israel, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the Claims Conference. The agreement really had two main parts. The first is the individual compensation program, and that was a commitment from Germany to provide compensation to individuals directly. And those programs still exist, and there are today a variety of programs that have grown out of this original one. But the second part was for Jewish communal renewal. And the terms they used, it was for the relief, rehabilitation, and resettlement of Jewish victims. And the German government gave 450 Deutschmarks toward this effort, which was basically spent by 1965. But the funds really went to Jewish cultural institutions, educational institutions, really trying to rebuild Jewish life in Europe. But they've also funded other things. For example, in 1953, Yad Vashem was founded, and 50% of that initial funding came from the Claims Conference, and the rest came from Israel and the Jewish Agency. We are approaching the 70th anniversary of the Luxembourg Agreements. That will be in 2022. And because this was such a significant historical event, we will be marking that together with the German government. And so you may hear of events in the next few months to mark that agreement.
Thank you.
So I just want to talk about, basically in 1990, we enter almost the second phase of the life of the Claims Conference. In 1990, with the reunification of Germany, the Claims Conference was involved in negotiations that led to a restitution law for property that had been in the former East Germany, that had been sold in 1933 under duress or was confiscated by Nazis. And because of this law, heirs were entitled to reclaim their property. If there were no heirs to these Jewish properties, then the Claims Conference was named the successor. And we were able to claim those, the Claims Conference was able to claim those properties in the name of the Jewish people. Those properties are then sold, and this has been the main source of funding for the education programs of the Claims Conference, and for a long time for most of social welfare as well, until more recently the German government has stepped in and provided very significant support for Holocaust survivors. Because of the source of the funding, we've always treated this money with a lot of respect, because we're really very much aware that the money that we're using belonged to a house, that belonged to a family, and that family probably has no heirs. And so we are ensuring that this is their legacy, that their stories are told, and that we are able to help their fellow survivors. And so this is the attitude that really has colored the use of our funds from the beginning. I just want to show on the right, this is a picture of Rabbi Israel Miller. He was the president of the organization at this time and really spearheaded this effort. He used to quote a lot from the Bible, specifically a passage from Kings 121. So in this story, King Ahab kills Naboth and he steals his vineyard. And the prophet Elijah is instructed to go. And the quote he says is, "This is what the Lord says. Have you not murdered a man and seized his property?" This was very important to Rabbi Miller, that people shouldn't murder and then inherit, that there is an injustice from benefiting from the crimes of the Holocaust. What was different in the 1990s was that at this time, we had, in the beginning, in the 1950s, we were helping survivors to rebuild their lives. But in the 1990s, we had a lot of aging survivors. And really, first and foremost, it was most important to take care of survivors so that they could have their needs met and live out their lives with dignity. So that's always been the first priority. But also, we wanted to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust are transmitted to future generations. We had a board member who passed away in December, this past December, Baruch Shub. He was a survivor and a partisan. And he used to speak very eloquently about education and really devoted his life, he said, to this mission. And he said he promised his father when he left him that he would make sure that the world knew what was happening and that they would know what happened to the Jewish people. And so we had a lot of survivors that really felt that this mission, educating future generations, was integral to the work of the Claims Conference. Okay.
Yes, and so this brings us to the second question, because Claims Conference is not only, among other things, providing tools and funds and tools for education, but is also checking how we're doing. And I think Claims Conference has been in the news recently in 2018 when the comprehensive study of the Holocaust knowledge among the Americans was released. Can you tell us more about this survey of 2018?
Yes, so I'd like to speak about that, but I'll just give you some context that we've actually done a number of surveys looking at a variety of countries, and some have received more publicity than others. And I think it's just interesting to show you a little bit about those. So here you'll see on the left a chart, and this was a question. If people knew, respondents knew that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And what you'll find is that the numbers of people who are not aware of this 6 million number is quite high. And we consider that to be pretty much a basic fact that we would expect a well-educated person to know. And it's striking because you see in France and even in Austria, in Europe, in countries that really were affected, 69% did not know this number. So these results are very shocking, and you'll see that it's pretty consistent, the very high numbers throughout. On the right, though, you'll see it's a little bit, maybe the tiny bit of good news that we have in conducting these surveys is that respondents really feel that Holocaust education is important. And if you look at these numbers, they're very high and very encouraging. So maybe while people aren't aware of it, they do think that this is an important topic, and this really opens up a door for us. So this is the good news in this very disappointing results. So the study you mentioned, Jakob, was the most recent, and it really generated a lot of press, and it focused on Gen Z and millennials, 18 to 39-year-olds, a younger generation. And again, the results were again very disappointing. We found that only 44% of millennials and Gen Z know what Auschwitz is. Again, similarly, you'll see on the right that again, 6 million, 63% did not know that. So that's pretty much consistent with what you saw in those earlier slides in that 60% range. More than half, well over more than half that don't know this. But what's even more disturbing is look at the right, you'll see that 36% of respondents believe that 2 million or fewer were killed in the Holocaust. So not only are they may be ignorant, but they also may be misinformed and be carrying misinformation. So again, these are very worrying findings that this study brought to people's attention. And it received extensive coverage in the press. So these are examples of just a sampling of some of the articles that covered this at the time, and you'll see it's from all over the world. And also you'll see this is social media coverage. Mm-hmm. And the day that this study came out, it trended #1 on Twitter. And so what that tells us though is that people were talking about it. They were shocked by the results, and it was important. And so again, in spite of all of this bad news, bringing it to people's attention, having people discuss it, the importance of this topic was the bright side in these poor findings. So that's a little bit about our surveys.
Thank you. Yes, and I think it's important for us in Poland because it's hard for us to track those changes because such a survey on such scale has not been done, at least recently. And so the Claims Conference has been involved in a great range of programs created to educate about the Holocaust. Again, one of those programs would be the seminar that we've been organizing at the Galicia Jewish Museum for many years, which we are very grateful. The other program would be the exhibition that we've put together with our partners from Centropa, talking about the experience of the Polish Jews in the 20th century. But what are the other programs in different places that you are involved with?
Yeah, so we have a broad range of priorities, and I'm going to speak a little bit about them. I just want to show you, this is the institutional allocations department of the Claims Conference. On this, in this pie chart is represented here. The majority of the work that's done through this department is to help social welfare organizations work with survivors to help meet basic needs, home care, etc. And most of that funding at this point comes from the German government. And you'll see that the research education department is a much smaller piece of that overall work. This chart will show you, though, in 2020, the funding distribution, and you'll get an idea of, this is RED funding, of what our priorities areas are. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of these areas. So one of the first, most basic things that we do is we work on archival acquisition. That's really rescue the evidence. This is a paper that documented the history of what happened to the Holocaust. So the archives can be found throughout the world, and sometimes they've been in really terrible condition, and they've been in danger of being lost. Sometimes that's because the archive doesn't have funding for this to maintain them properly. Governments may not want to provide, may not be interested, and may not have the funding to provide to save these records. So we've worked very diligently to try to rescue the most important documents and to try to catalog them and make them available as much as possible to the general audience and scholars so that they can access this information for personal use and for research. So we have very major partners, which are the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem, who are engaged in this, as well as Memorial de la Shoah, but we do work with archives around the world. So the Jewish Historical Institute, for example, in Poland is one of our partners for this kind of work. So we hope that researchers will use these archives. And that's really another area for us. We support research and documentation efforts, research related to the Holocaust. This example that I show in front of you, the Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos, is really a massive research effort that began about 13 years ago. The plan is for this to be a 7-volume work. So far, 3 volumes have been published and 2 of them are available online. And so each entry will tell you a little bit about a camp in Europe or North Africa, tell you a little bit about the administration, the population, major historical events associated with the camp. And this work has been quite useful for survivors who are trying to establish their compensation, to establish their claims for compensation and to substantiate those claims. So this reference will help to substantiate those claims for them to qualify. And what's fascinating as well is that when this project commenced, the editors thought they would have 7,000 entries. And at this point, they have over 44,000 concentration camps and ghettos that have been identified.
Absolutely amazing.
So what is the best way to reach our students, the next generation that we really need to reach? And this is really a priority of the Claims Conference, is teacher training. The main reason is that there's a multiplier effect. A great teacher can reach easily over 100 students a year and really impact those students. If they teach for 10 years, maybe it's 1,000 students. But we really appreciate and value those teachers. We hope that when we support teacher training programs, those teachers receive training in sound pedagogical skills to teach this material. They are shown resources that they can use for their classrooms. And probably most importantly, they have the opportunity to engage with each other, to talk about what their challenges are in their classrooms. And this might be different depending on where it is. And this is why it's so important to have these trainings, to give these teachers the opportunity. We fund them throughout the world. And as Jaco mentioned, the Galicia Jewish Museum is one of our partners that we are pleased to partner with in this effort. While we do fund teacher training, and that really is a very high priority for us, we do fund education programs that reach individual pupils. So an example of this is the Forum for Dialogue School of Dialogue program. As many of you know, Poland had the largest Jewish population of Europe before the Holocaust, and their communities were throughout Poland. At this point, students are given the opportunity through this program to research and uncover the Jewish history of their own towns. They research it and then they present their findings in a presentation to their peers, to their family, and to the community. And so it's a very nice program because it's really driven by the youth themselves. We also fund, as Jaco mentioned earlier, exhibitions, and those can be larger permanent exhibitions that are museums throughout the world, but it can also be a smaller exhibit that travels. This is an example of Anne Frank. Everybody loves learning about the story of Anne Frank, and this one travels throughout Slovakia. And for this particular project, students are trained as guides and they provide the tours for other students. So this is similar to the Forum project where also students are driving these projects, and we've heard anecdotally from our partners, this is very effective, that youth like to hear from other youth. The Claims Conference wants to support the next generation of scholars. And so we try to, through the Saul Kagan Fellowship Program, we're pleased to support at this point 6 scholars each year. These are PhD and postdoc candidates. We have funded over 87 fellows to date. They come from around the world and they do research in all kinds of under-researched and unknown areas of the Holocaust. And we're really pleased because the alumni from these programs are found all over the world in key positions. They've published works. Here are some pictures of some of the works that have been published, and they're professors and they're involved in museums. And so it's very encouraging when we see them take these leadership positions that we hope that they would take when we've funded them. We do occasionally prioritize certain projects for certain regions. So this is probably our newest program. This is the University Partnership Program. This is really targeted for universities that are located in Eastern Europe. And we seek applications from universities that don't currently offer Holocaust courses. And there are a few aims in supporting this program. Sometimes we've been able to place some of our fellowship graduates into these positions. We hope that through bringing these courses to the universities, we're exposing a new cadre of students, university students, to the topic. And lastly, we hope that the university will eventually undertake to continue offering these courses as part of their regular offerings, curriculum offerings. So far, we've had this program has been implemented in Hungary, the Ukraine, Bulgaria, and Latvia. And in the fall, we're excited that it will be in Serbia and Croatia as well. These are some of the examples of the courses that are taught. In addition to teaching the students, they also offer some public lectures so that it can permeate, the subject matter will permeate into the community as well. So another area which is unique is film. In recognition of the unique ability of film to bring lessons and the memory of the Holocaust to life, we have fun films. They have the potential to reach very large audiences and also to spark discussions. To date, the Claims Conference has provided funding toward over 147 films. The applicants come from all over the world, and we fund many types. We fund documentaries and narratives. We fund feature-length films and short films. You probably may have heard of Son of Saul. That probably had our biggest success, which won an Academy Award. but many of our films have premiered at prestigious film festivals around the world. Who Will Write Our History is a film which deals with the Ringelblum archives, and that also has had tremendous success and screenings around the world. What's interesting is that we don't just look at a film and look at the story. There are a lot of criterion that go into selecting what kind of film we'll fund. So story is one thing, but we also will look at the region. What's the story? Is this something under-researched, unknown? Is there something that will be captured on film that we want to have captured on film, irrespective of the larger story? And the reach of the possible new audiences. These are all things that we consider when we consider funding for a particular film. And this is just an idea of the global reach of the Claims Conference. So while you may think we say we fund programs in 28 countries, in fact, the reach is much larger for a number of reasons. So Jaco mentioned Centropa, for example, before. So Centropa is based in Austria. We would say they get the funding in Austria. However, the programs they run are throughout Eastern Europe. Memorial de la Shoah is another example. We would say their grant is in France, but the programs that we support through them reach Eastern Europe, Spain, Portugal, throughout Europe. Yad Vashem is another example that trains teachers throughout the world. Another thing is that the film program also has a tremendous reach. Our films have reached places where we have no contacts as of yet, and Holocaust educations don't exist as far as we know. So when you look at this map, you'll see countries that are really exciting for us to know that the work that we've supported has been shown in those countries. And that's just a little bit about the priorities and the kinds of things that we fund.
It's absolutely amazing to see the scale of the work. And yes, you mentioned both Centropa and Yad and Unum. These are both organizations that we are collaborating. So I think it's also the Claims Conference has always been encouraging those organizations to collaborate with each other, as it helps. But changing a bit the subject, over the last few years, here in Poland and in some other places in Eastern Europe especially, we have witnessed a change in the government policy toward the Holocaust education, kind of in Poland, shifting accents, for example, from teaching about the Jews and about the Jewish experience during the Holocaust to, and again, that's an example from Poland, to teaching about the Poles that were saving the Jews, which is, of course, important, but is excluding 99% of the story. So what are the main challenges of the Holocaust education in other places across the world that you are aware of?
Okay, so yes, there are a lot of challenges in Holocaust education today. The first one is simply the passage of time and the loss of survivors. When I grew up, many of us knew survivors, or we knew people who were alive during World War II. And there was a connection. There was someone we could ask who actually was alive during that time. Today, the youngest survivors that are able to tell their stories are about 80. And so they aren't as accessible to our youth. And so this story is receding, and to young people, it seems like it was a million years ago. So this really is just a natural phenomenon, but probably is the biggest challenge. We have to shift because of this, a lot of the ways we think about Holocaust education. We can't take it for granted maybe in the way we used to. Another challenge is Holocaust denial. So ever since the David Irving trial, we don't see Holocaust denial as being so much an issue in scholarly circles, but it's shifted. It definitely is an issue online. And in fact, one of our surveys recently, the recent survey, showed that nearly 50% of the respondents had seen some sort of denial online. So this is a huge issue for us to be aware of. Another issue, which you mentioned just now, is Holocaust distortion and minimization. This is probably newer and something that we're confronting more of. And so a good example that you gave is the shift to focusing on rescuers. There's no question that Polish rescuers were huge heroes, right? They risked their own lives, their families' lives, and it's really important to laud these individuals and tell those stories. However, we also need to put it in the context of the larger history and to understand the percentages of what happened to the nearly 3 million Jews that were in Poland. So again, this is the tricky thing of distortion and minimization. Sometimes aspects are presented that are true, but don't tell you the whole story. And so that's one aspect of this kind of challenge that we're facing. But there are other challenges as well. There's an increase around the world in conspiracy myths that are online. There's a rise of anti-Semitism that we've seen more and more in recent years. That's really been shocking. And again, the influx of online misinformation. I think something that also goes to minimization is the increased use and misappropriation of Holocaust-related terms and symbols. So here's a picture of a yellow star that's being used in vaccine protests. And so this really cheapens and minimizes the Jewish star and its symbol in the Holocaust. And I think that's just something that we really need to be sensitive of, is the use of symbols and language. And that's a challenge as well. Another challenge is the lack of Holocaust specializing scholars. Now, this isn't unique to our field. This is really throughout the world that liberal studies, history departments throughout universities and high schools have really been facing significant cutbacks as there's a shift much more towards STEM. And so this is a global phenomenon, but certainly affects us as well. And the last one that we have as a challenge is really encouraging research and open expression. And something for us to think about is, how do we encourage researchers to really try to get as close as possible to the truth of what happened in the history of the Holocaust, and to be able to have forums where they can have open discussions and debate and analyze this as much as possible. So these are just some of them. There are other challenges, but these are kind of the biggest ones that we see ongoing today.
Thank you. In 2020, I was part of another program that was run by Claims Conference. That was a series of conversations with Holocaust educators and experts and museum people about the Holocaust education. So unlike this was the previous surveys, it was not targeting the regular population or the general population, but rather was aiming experts. What were the findings of those discussions?
So this was a unique opportunity for us to engage with experts from around the world that really had insightful opinions and were able to share with us a broader view of Holocaust from their perspectives and what's important in terms of education. And overwhelmingly, the experts reaffirmed that the current priorities remain important. So they said nothing will replace a well-trained teacher, and the documents still need to be preserved and made accessible. So those kind of fundamental things that we focused on will continue to be a focus in the future. That being said, they've also identified other areas that they thought we should pursue additional opportunities and do additional work in those areas. So I've listed here just some of the examples of things that were raised. So the first is in research and evaluation. So the first one I listed here is the evaluating educational technology. As survivors pass, there's a lot of discussion as to how well youth be able to interact and replace those conversations that they used to have with one-on-one with survivors themselves. One tool that was recently developed by the USC Shoah Visual History Foundation is DIT. That's a hologram. So a survivor, you can see a picture on the right of this process, Eva Schloss, is taken to a room where they are asked thousands of questions, and these are all recorded. There's actually a film called 116 Cameras, you can find it online, that shows you this process. And that's actually a Claims Conference supported film. So in this process, through this process, they also create an image of the survivor, and that can be accessed either on a flat screen, but also in a three-dimensional format. And visitors to museums and people who interact on a computer can interact with this hologram and ask them questions as if they were talking to anybody. And the survivor will then answer based on these pre-recorded answers that they gave in the studio. So this is becoming increasingly popular, but it's very expensive. And we see that a lot of institutions want to bring this kind of technology into their institutions. So one thing we will be doing is initiating research to actually evaluate, are there different outcomes when a student engages with this kind of technology as opposed to a diary or a tape testimony? And so this is something where the Claims Conference can bring something unique and sponsor this, and the results are something that should help the entire field. And so that's something that we're very excited about, and we hope to initiate more similar type of programs where it's not focused maybe on an individual institution, but something that can be shared with everyone who's working in this field. Another example are teacher training programs. Our teacher training programs are amazing, and we have dedicated people, and the teachers themselves are committed. But we sometimes make claims, and we say that our programs have goals, and we don't always know, are we really meeting those goals? When we say that somebody who engages in Holocaust material, that we expect certain outcomes, is that true? Is that not true? And how do we gauge that? That really requires experts to evaluate, to help assess, and research to be conducted as to what's effective. So is it dealing with, is it a particular technology? Is it a survivor testimony? Or is it hearing a lecture? We don't know the answers to all of that. And so there really is a lot of room for research, and that's something that we hope to engage in much more in the coming years. Another opportunity that you had mentioned a little earlier, Jakob, is partnerships. Many of you know there's Association of Holocaust Organizations, IRA, and these are unique forums where people who work in the field have opportunity to share ideas, to develop collaborations, etc. And that's something that we're going to be working more on, and we hope to encourage and to see more of. And so again, so we can think about broader themes that affect all of us. Probably the thing that came out the most in our conversations with experts was social media. That's where young people are today. Not just young people, a lot of adults, but I have a 14-year-old, so I can say young people spend a lot of time on social media. And we need to be where the young people are. So this is very important, and we are going to be looking for innovative projects that are in this medium, and we're going to be ourselves in this medium, and to think about how we can work and how we can reach people. So an example of a program that was very innovative, Claims Conference was not involved with, was Eva Stories. I don't know if you're aware of it. It was a film that was shot specifically to be shown on Instagram. And it was a recreation of a diary, and the main character, she filmed herself as if she was speaking on a phone as young people speak today. And this really resonated with the youth, and millions of people watched this. It's had a huge success. And so we would like to see more of these kinds of projects. and really go out and find young people where they are and interest them. Probably the last thing is online programming. And COVID really opened up a new world for our partners. Many of them had to pivot during this COVID time, and some of them have had success that they didn't imagine that they would. People are very happy to stay at home on their couches and tune into all kinds of programs that maybe they wouldn't attend in person. Also, there's the ability to reach audiences that maybe we wouldn't be able to reach. Maybe teachers in rural locations, it's difficult for them to travel. And so I think something we need to discuss and think about more for the future is how can we utilize this technology that we've all become so used to using on a regular basis to increase our reach and engage audiences that maybe we didn't have access to before COVID. So I think that's a small, tiny thing that we've learned from COVID among the many lessons, but something that we definitely will be carrying with us into the future.
Thank you, Hannah. It's all. It was very interesting, and it's also a challenge because we are tend to repeat the things that we've been doing for years, and the claims conference surveys are clearly showing that while there are successes, while people do care about the Holocaust, there is still a big gap. The big space where we are not reaching, or which we are people that we are not reaching with the programs that we've been conducting so far. So definitely there is those ideas, those new paths should be investigated. So we don't have too many people with us live, but if there is any questions, we will be happy to take them now. We also have, let me just see on Facebook if there are comments coming from Facebook. Speaking about new technologies, but I think Facebook is already not that new for 14 years older.
It's the old timers.
Old timers, yes. So we are behind. If there are no questions, Hannah, let me just once again thank you and all your colleagues for the work, exceptional work you've been doing. The organization is as good as the people that are creating it and working it, and you and your staff and your colleagues. And let me just mention one of your colleagues, Tony Rodriguez, that has been working with us as our grant officer. We've always been appreciating the devotion and professionalism of Tony and your colleagues. So thank you so much for providing all of this information for us. This is truly interesting and very useful in terms of looking further, looking at what's going on in other places, as I think too often we try to reinvent things that have been already done in some other places. So Hannah, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, this evening, and for all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the amazing work that your institution does as well.
Thank you. So please join us if you watch this. Search for other programs and other recordings of interviews and discussions we've have on our YouTube channel and on the Facebook channel of the Galicia Jewish Museum. As Hannah said, it's for all timers, but listen, you can still do that. Thank you everybody, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.